Hello and welcome to Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Carol Newcomb-Aludo. I'm chair of CMC's Board of Trustees. It's so great to see everyone here on a little bit less than sunny day, I'm afraid, but spring is coming. There is hope. Today, CMC presents Business Support Boosts Ohio Fairness Act, sponsored by Hannah News Service. Please help me thank Hannah for their support. Audience questions today will be submitted in writing. You will fill out the paper in your Fly'em forum with your questions, and then please make sure to include your name. Volunteer members of CMC's program committee will collect these, sort them for appropriate and balanced content, and select the best questions to be read aloud. The Ohio Fairness Act will make it illegal to discriminate against people based on sexual orientation, gender, and gender identity in the areas of employment, housing, and public accommodations. At the U.S. Supreme Court level and in state houses around the nation, law seems to be trending on the side of equality, and businesses, large and small, seem to be supporting this. But there are many who believe otherwise. Let's explore these issues with our experts. Please welcome Board Chair of the Equality Ohio Education Fund, Sandra Anderson. VP of Government Relations for the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, Holly Gross. President of Citizens for Community Values, Baer. And of course, our host, journalist at the Ohio Statehouse News Bureau, Andy Chow. Andy.
All right. Thank you, Carol. I thought we could get started just by talking a little bit about history of this bill. This is one of those bills, if you're a journalist at the Statehouse, you see bills get introduced every session that you just know they're just going to come around year after year. Lately, it's been a Republican-dominated House and Senate, so you know that a bill like this usually doesn't move forward because it hasn't gotten attention in the past. This bill, in one form or another, has been around for more than 10 years. And actually, in 2009, it passed out of the Ohio House when the Ohio House was controlled by Democrats, and then it didn't move anywhere in the Senate. So this has been something that's been a long time coming as far as policymaking goes. In those 10 years, it's actually evolved to, I believe, make stronger language when it comes to gender identity. And as I'm sure you know, if you're following current events, it's something that's been talked about more and more in the public eye is gender identity. So this bill's been around for a while. The themes of the bill have remained the same over the past 10 years. So I thought we'd start with Sandy. Of course, Equality Ohio has been for this bill year after year after year. What would this bill do? What would this kind of legislation do for the LGBTQ community?
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's good to see so many faces out there of friends and new friends. Yes, Equality Ohio is very excited, Andy, about House Bill 160. This version has been introduced by Representative Nikki Antonio from Cleveland, and we're very grateful to her. And we're grateful to the hearing panel, the committee that held a hearing on the bill January 31st of this year. We consider this to be not a political issue. This is a nonpartisan, business-friendly law. And if I could do the following just to set the stage, I want to tell you a bit about why personally this is of interest to me. I want to tell you a bit about Equality Ohio, and then I want to tell you a bit about the House Bill 160 hearing that has been supported by so many people. So I'm going to embarrass you and tell you my wife is in the room back there. Yeah, she's embarrassed. My wife and I have been together for 25 years, and we were married in August of 2014 in Seattle, Washington. It was the happiest weekend of my life so far. Now, when we came back to Ohio, our marriage was not recognized here. because it had not, the Obergefell decision had not yet been decided. We came back to Ohio, our marriage was not legal yet. About a year later, in 2015, the United States Supreme Court made marriage equality the law of the land in June of 2015. And suddenly, all of us, our marriages were recognized as equal all over the United States. What people find surprising in many states, including Ohio, what they find surprising is that in Ohio, we still don't have legal protections for LGBTQ citizens in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And what that means is that a person can be married, post their pictures on Facebook, as we did, come back to their home state and be fired from the job, be denied housing, be denied service in a restaurant or store, bakery, what have you. And that's just not right. And so House Bill 160 will address that. Now, Equality Ohio has been around since 2005. We were founded by a group of activists in the basement of a church. We actually have our board meetings in a church, I will tell you. And we were founded in 2005 in order to inform and change hearts and minds on this issue. And so people like me, when we come out and we tell our stories, we hopefully show that it's all about love and it's not about anything that is to be feared. Now, House Bill 160 is a very simple change to the law. House Bill 160 changes the protected classes, adds to the protected classes. Now, what a protected class means is, let's take employment. In employment, you cannot be fired, terminated, disciplined on the basis of certain classes: race, color, age, military status, religious status, and so forth. So those protected classes are already there. What House Bill 160 does is drop in, wherever those protected classes are listed, drops in the words sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So it's a simple, clean, clear change to the law that is, as you'll soon learn, backed by a growing number of Ohio businesses and organizations. So I'll stop there.
And so, yeah, and I mean, I have a ton to unpack about what you said as well.
I've got a ton to say too, but I'll wait.
And getting back to the idea that this has been around for 10 years, the thing that makes it so different this year compared to other years is that more business groups are coming out for the bill. That includes the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, that includes Columbus Chamber. So Holly, what is it that your organization likes about this bill? Why would it be business friendly to support a bill like this?
Yeah, so at the Columbus Chamber, we are proponents because our members support it. This truly was a member-driven issue. We started, when we go through an endorsement process, we do a pretty rigorous analysis, and especially with an issue like this that can have the appearance of being controversial to some. So we first put the bill through our Government Affairs Steering Committee, which is a committee of government relations professionals from businesses across the Columbus region. They, after voting it affirmatively out of that committee, they thought it was really important to put it through the Small Business Council because of the potential impact on small businesses. I'm pleased to say that we did receive a unanimous vote of support out of that Small Business Council, which was then approved by our full board of directors. So we were then joined, when we signed on to, it's called Ohio Business Competes, was sort of the impetus for gaining business community support. There's a poster over there with all of the businesses. It's 300 and
almost 40.
Yeah.
Maybe as we speak, there's been 340 signed up.
Yeah. And a lot of Columbus Chamber members are on that list, we're proud to say. So then I started to try and build support amongst our Metro Chamber colleagues throughout the state, where we now have the Greater Cleveland Partnership and the Cincinnati Chamber on board, and most recently, the Dayton Chamber of Commerce, which is a traditionally very conservative chamber. And of course, the Ohio Chamber testified as proponents to the bill for the first time in its history.
All right, great.
So I can talk about why, I think.
What's the big reason? What's the main reason businesses should want this?
Absolutely. They view it as a policy that's crucial to making Ohio more competitive. It helps us to be competitive against states that have already enacted these policies in attracting mega economic development projects like Amazon. It's also a tool for businesses, large and small, in attracting and retaining the best and brightest talent. That's what we heard over and over again. Businesses consistently have told us that having a diverse and inclusive workforce has benefits to them. It helps their bottom line. And so the best that we can welcome our state, welcome employees, welcome Ohioans of the LGBTQ community to our workforce. It's positive for the business community.
Aaron, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Citizens for Community Values is not for this bill. You've opposed it in years past, and now there's more of a business aspect that's being brought to the table. There's more rhetoric around business. So where does your group stand when it comes to HB 160?
Absolutely. Well, Andy, I can't thank you enough for having this forum, for having a place like this where we can have a discussion on a bill like House Bill 160, where so much of our media today is divided between Fox News and MSNBC, and never the two shall meet. So to be able to talk about something like this in an environment that's, this bill is very emotionally charged on both sides, and understandably so. When you're talking about things like discrimination, you're talking about things like religious freedom that are very near and dear to the hearts of Ohioans and all people. Things can get pretty contentious pretty quickly, and so it's important to look at a bill like House Bill 160 and look at it as objectively as possible. First off, when we look at a bill like House Bill 160, or really any legislation, you want to start with the question of what's the problem we're trying to fix right here, and how do we go about solving that problem in a way that has as little negative impact as possible. When we put House Bill 160 through this analysis, unfortunately, it fails pretty miserably, honestly. First and foremost, do we have rampant discrimination happening in Ohio right now that would justify the need to make sexual orientation and gender identity a protected class? Sandy did a great job of sort of walking through the different protected classes that we have. And when you look at the analysis of the Civil Rights Act and all those times where we've made race or sex or other disabilities, we've made these things protected classes, elevated them to that legal protection level. We've been able to see there's a pretty robust and problematic system of discrimination going on. You had African Americans driving across the states of Mississippi or Alabama and not being able to find a hotel room. Well, that's not happening in Ohio, and certainly hasn't been happening anytime soon for LGBT individuals. You may have some stories where that's happened, and that's a shame. And I should say, nobody wants to see discrimination. We work with evangelical Catholic churches and people all across the state, and nobody supports discrimination in any of its form. But the question is, do we need a government policy, an overreaching government policy that has strict penalties, that's vague in its nature, to deal with this? And I would say the answer is no. And I think really what shows that we don't have a problem with discrimination is the fact that you have so many businesses stepping up and saying they don't discriminate in their hiring practices. We have the Columbus Chamber here. We have the Ohio Chamber that has endorsed this bill. These are the most powerful institutions in our state that are stepping forward saying we don't discriminate. So if we're going to really take a big step in adding something like this that has negative consequences that we have seen, both for ministries, people that are serving our communities, the heroin opioid epidemic ministries that are serving men and women in crisis, to orphanages, places like Catholic Charities that have been shut down due to laws like these, to just private businesses that are simply trying to operate according to their faith, serving people of all backgrounds, of all relationship status, those types of things, but may not want to celebrate or communicate a message that violates their conscience. These laws like House Bill 160, have created all of these problems in the name of solving a problem that may be very near and dear to some people's hearts and may have actually caused some issues for individuals and some pain, but isn't happening on such mass levels here in Ohio that warrants such a serious and what I would consider a pretty radical step of adding new protected classes to our civil rights laws. And
do you mind if I jump in?
Absolutely.
Real quick? I'd love to get your take on something and then come to Sandy for her take. You said it's not happening at a mass level. Is it possible it's not happening at a mass level because people are too afraid to report it and they feel like they don't have that protection there to begin with?
It's hard to speculate on those types of things, but what I would say is that, again, you look at how much the LGBT community is celebrated in Ohio today. The Stonewall Columbus Parade is you can't drive through Columbus when that's going on here. You really don't see a culture where these things are happening. And even, too, you look at the Columbus Dispatch back in end of December wrote a story on this, and the two stories they used to highlight this issue was a story from 15 years ago and another story that was from relatively recently that I would hope actually wouldn't be covered under this law, where an employee basically was saying that their boss had expressed Christian views on marriage and said that Christian views on sexuality and homosexuality, and was never discriminated against, was never fired, was never penalized in any form, but the Columbus Dispatch used that as an example of discrimination. That's a speech issue there, and I would hope that people would say that House Bill 160 wouldn't restrict somebody from sharing their views about a biblical view of sexuality, for example.
Sandy?
Sure. Let me provide some information that will help answer this question on whether there's a problem to be solved. And the bottom line is, of course, there is a problem to be solved. So here's some information that might help. First of all, every day, certainly every week, Equality Ohio, our staff, receives phone calls from people all around the state who are suffering discrimination because they are LGBTQ. Students, people in workplace, housing, being denied government services. We get the calls all the time, which is one of the reasons we support House Bill 160, because all those folks don't have legal recourse. As the testimony showed in front of the January 31st hearing, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission brought information. Between 2004 and 2017, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission received 106 complaints of LGBT-based discrimination. And 40 of those were just filed since 2015, which is telling because that's when marriage equality came into being, and people thought there might be protections, and so the complaints had an uptick. No legal recourse for any of those people that called in because we didn't have House Bill 160 and still don't. And we don't know whether those claims had merit because the Ohio Civil Rights Commission couldn't investigate them. There's no law that requires them to investigate. We don't know how many more people would have called in had there been protections and had they known that the state of Ohio had their back and protected them from discrimination in housing and lending and public accommodations and employment. We don't know how many more people would have filed had they known there was legal protection. And then there's the testimony. You want some stories? Their testimony was compelling in front of the hearing on House Bill 160. There was the school teacher, Jimmy Beal, who has taught school for 30 years. And after she'd had 15 years worth of sterling reviews, excellent reviews, when the principal found out the truth that has always been Jimmy Beal's, that she is a lesbian, that she has a wife, that she has kids, she was fired shortly after she had gotten one of her sterling reviews. She had no legal recourse. And then there was the young transgender man in Cleveland who was enrolled in graduate school, moved into his apartment, and after he'd moved in, his landlord did a background check, found out that he was transgender, and kicked him out, rendered him homeless. And he eventually had to drop out of his graduate school studies because of the economics of that. And then there was the last witness. The last witness, a little girl, pink sweater, long brown hair. When she came up to the podium with her mother, she had to stand on tiptoes to reach the microphone and to see her notes. And she told the story about being bullied. And she said discrimination is another word for bullying. And that she was bullied when she was 5 years old, she said, back when I was a boy, on the playground when I brought a pink backpack to school. A 52-year-old man in a business suit bullied me, told the kids not to play with me, and my principal didn't support me. I'm scared to go to school, I want to grow up. Please protect me, please pass House Bill 160. Those stories, those statistics, and many more that we don't even know about, shows there's a problem to be solved. There's no doubt.
And I can see Holly and Aaron want to jump in on this. Holly, why don't you go first? And then Aaron, when you do respond, I'd love to know what you think about the business aspect of everything too, but go ahead, Holly.
I would add that from the employer perspective, We absolutely applaud those that do have policies in place. That's fantastic, but until that's ubiquitous in the workplace and in society, those protections are necessary to bring the rest of them along. And also from a talent attraction and retention standpoint, a business does have trouble attracting LGBTQ individuals, retaining and recruiting them if they can have a job, but they may be in danger of losing their home or in danger of being discriminated in public accommodation. Businesses want their employees to be able to live their best lives, and that's just not possible without these protections in place.
Aaron?
I appreciate that. So a few things here. Speaking of numbers, so we're in the process right now at Citizens for Community Values of actually, because along with House Bill 160 at the state level, these similar type ordinances have been going around the state into different cities. So I think it's 20 right now, 22, something like that have
20 cities, municipalities.
20
yes.
municipalities that have these right now, and we're public records.
Columbus is one of them.
Columbus is one of them. The 3 Cs, Yellow Springs, I think South Euclid, Bexley, just passed these ordinances, and we've gone through and our public records, asking for public records on these to see what's happening. And we're still in the process of collecting these. I think we've gotten 7 or 8 back so far, and we haven't, in all of those cities, some of them as large as Cincinnati, we've gotten one city come back with one complaint that's come through. And in that one complaint, I think it shows some of the, to your question, Andy, some of the problems that this causes for both businesses, and then I'm going to share a story about what this causes for individuals. So in this one example, came out of Canton. It was an apartment complex, and the apartment complex was, somebody filed a claim against them that they were evicted because they were gay. And so if you're an apartment complex and you get if you're a small business and you have one of these challenges filed against you, you've got to lawyer up, you've got to take it seriously. If it gets out there that you are evicting people because they're gay, can you imagine what the public backlash would rightfully be for evicting people because they're gay? That's kind of the market at work in many ways dealing with this issue. Well, the apartment, after going through the process of sending a response back, they said no, we didn't evict them because they were gay. They weren't paying their rent. And we have plenty of other young gay couples that live here, and we can show you this. And this is the problem that these things create for businesses. One of the many problems, I would say, that these laws like House Bill 160, the problems they create for businesses. The other story, though, that I want to share that I think is important when we're looking at this is the story of Kelvin Cochran. Kelvin Cochran is a fire chief in Atlanta, was actually a fire chief for Atlanta. He's one of those right-wing nut jobs that goes and works for President Barack Obama, actually, and was fire chief of Atlanta, went and worked for the Obama administration, came back, and was the Atlanta fire chief again. Mr. Cochran is a believer, and in his free time, he wrote a 160-page devotional for his church on sort of biblical worldview type things. You know how you all write 160-page devotionals in your spare time. And in that 160-page devotional, there was one page that talked about a biblical sexual ethic: sex inside of marriage, no divorce, and sex reserved between a man and a woman. Somebody on his team got a hold of that book and sent it over to a council member. And the council said, "Oh, this looks like discrimination. We need to investigate this guy." So the mayor and the council opened an investigation into Mr. Cochran. What they found out was none of his staff, and he had a fairly large staff if you're the fire chief of a town like Atlanta, there was never a claim of discrimination against Mr. Cochran. Everybody said he only treated them with the utmost respect, as Christians are called to do. However, that wasn't good enough. Just by the fact that he had these views, and Atlanta had a law like House Bill 160, they used that as grounds to fire Mr. Cochran. This is the type of consequences we see from these laws. This is the type of really speech restrictions and really anti-diversity policies that flow out of bills like House Bill 160. And why we say, again, we need to find ways to live together. Sometimes public policy creating a broad law like House Bill 160 isn't the right way of going about going about creating better diversity, pluralism in our society, in our city.
And so we hear stories like this, and usually whenever an issue comes up, let's say the bathroom bill in North Carolina, wedding cakes in Indiana, you always hear this counter argument, these stories like, I think you said Kelvin Cochran.
Yep.
You hear these stories. Sandy, what do you think about the stories that you hear nationwide in response to these types of bills? And could that happen here in Ohio? Could somebody be unfairly fired? Could somebody be adversely affected by HB 160?
Now, let me say a few things to unpack that. Before I was retired, I was an employment lawyer. All right? So I realize that there are cases that have to be investigated and found to be meritorious or not. That's just the way of the world. And you can find 1,000 cases where the employer was liable, and you can find one case where the employer got screwed, and that just is the way it is. So every individual case has its own different story to tell. And the reason we have a system of justice, the reason we have an Ohio Civil Rights Commission, is to investigate those claims and see which ones have merit and which don't. That is not a reason not to pass a bill that will protect so many citizens that need protection. Another thing I want to point out, just to be clear about this, House Bill 160 does not change religious freedom one bit. The religious exemptions that exist under the law for churches, for pastors, for religious institutions are still the same. Our First Amendment rights to freedom of religion, still the same. House Bill 160 has nothing to do with that. But now let's look at the actual experiences of the 20 states and District of Columbia that have these same laws and have had some of them for years. Let's look at the 250 cities across the country that have these same laws protecting LGBTQ citizens and have for some time. Let's look at those 20 municipalities, including the city of Columbus, that have these same laws and protections for LGBTQ citizens. And you know what? They work. And you know what? There's not a flood of lawsuits, and there's not all this fear of, gosh, somebody might make a claim. Well, if somebody makes a claim, investigate it, they might have merit, right? So we've seen the experience of these 20 states, 250 cities or 200 cities, 20 cities in Ohio, and it's fine, it's working. It makes people like me feel safe and secure. It makes us want to stay in the state of Ohio, for God's sake, which is what the Columbus Chamber of Commerce wants to have happen, what the Ohio Chamber of Commerce wants to have happen. It makes us stay. It doesn't make us litigate. It welcomes us. That is the difference. And so you're not, I'm just not impacted by the individual stories because they need to be unpacked and find out whether they have merit or not.
Aaron, could you, I saw you react to the religious freedom. Just very briefly, does this impact religious freedom?
Absolutely. I don't see there's any way to say that it doesn't, especially when we see cases before the courts right now across the country where people are being, Mr. Cochran literally he had something out there that said what his views were on sexuality, and that was enough for him to lose his job.
Didn't he distribute that to his employees? Wasn't that the issue in that particular
they asked for it, it was available to them, but even that being available.
He handed that out to individual employees.
But I guess my question to that is that's even if that happened.
Sorry, just for recording wise, somebody yelled out from the audience, didn't Mr. Cochran distribute the materials to his employees?
So even if that was distributed, I think that's a great example of the problem and the broadness of these laws where nobody lost their job. There was no evidence of anybody being denied a promotion. There was no evidence of anybody being mistreated other than Mr. Cochran having that view. That's a speech restriction. That's something much more broader, where basically what if that was the case, if the case is that he got fired because he distributed it, that's a pretty broad law there, and that's saying that if you work here, you can't have these views and say what your views are. That's especially when you consider that I think the last Gallup poll I saw said that 74%, 73%. Of Ohioans are Christians, and while there are some people who say they're Christians people who are Christians that would support a law like House Bill 160, I think I'm pretty on good ground saying that the majority of them would hold an orthodox view of sexuality. To tell those people that you're going to lose your job if you speak out on these issues, if you share your opinion. That's the opposite of pluralism. That's the opposite of us living together. That's saying if you disagree, you're going to be punished. And we see those things happening.
And so I want to jump in here and remind you that we will have a question and answer segment. People are handing out pieces of paper. They're in the back there. So if you want to write down a question, make sure you write it down and get it back to the volunteers. Holly?
I would say laws that were intended to shield religious liberties are now being used as a sword against anti-discrimination policies. The Supreme Court 50 years ago decided the question, there was a case that a restaurant owner, Piggy Park, invoked their religious beliefs when denying service to an African American. And we at the Columbus Chamber have taken the position that when a business opens their doors to the public, they open them to all. And I think we decided as a society a long time ago that discrimination is unacceptable. And, you know, I think House Bill 160 does not afford additional rights to the LGBT community. It treats them with fairness and equally, just like the rest of us.
Sandy, we've heard different scenarios, different arguments back and forth. Could somebody be susceptible to a lawsuit here, vulnerable to things here? Is part of this, if you were to implement these into protected classes, is there just inherent growing pains that come along with that as well? Should we expect certain lawsuits to kind of just smooth things out, like in the process? Does that just come with it?
It may, but you know, as they say, as a wise man once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think we're bending towards justice very, very rapidly when it comes to LGBTQ rights, much more so than we bent toward justice with some of these other protected classes. It certainly was the case that when racial discrimination was outlawed, all businesses didn't necessarily snap to and start obeying that law, that it did take some growing pains, it did take some changing hearts and minds. And we may have some of that, but that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. When we see the number of businesses that are supporting Ohio Business Competes, when we look at my alma mater, Aaron's too, Ohio University, that's one of my favorite favorite organizations that have supported Ohio Business Competes Coalition in favor of the state law. The Ohio State University, let's give the Buckeyes equal credit. But AEP, Timken Steel, Eaton, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, I'm sorry? Huntington, of course. Look at all of the names and look at the website at the growing names. When you see the business support for this law, you can anticipate that the growing pains, if there are any, are going to be small and mute and not that important. But if I could say one more word about this religious freedom issue, let me reiterate again that this bill, House Bill 160, does nothing to alter one's religious freedoms. It does nothing to alter the exemptions that are already in the law for religious freedom. And as Holly said, let me give another aspect to it. You know, religion cannot be used as a sword. You know, you can believe anything you want. You can go to church anytime, worship the way you will, believe anything you want. You can believe that I'm going to hell and I disagree with you, but you can believe that, but you're not entitled to impose your religious beliefs on others, and certainly to the public. You're not entitled to impose your religious beliefs on your employees, Jaron. You're not entitled to impose your religious beliefs on the public. You know, when we go to a store, a restaurant, we don't have to fill out a questionnaire to see if our religious beliefs align with the religion of the store owner. That's just not right. That's not the way we balance civil rights and religious freedom in the United States.
And so I think I'd like to get back to the idea of, so we're talking about religious freedoms, but as Aaron pointed out, free speech. So if your views are not changing housing or employment, but you still get fired because you say what you think at work, is that a fireable offense under HB 160? This idea of, can 160 prevent free speech in that way?
That hypothetical doesn't have enough facts in it for me to answer.
Yeah.
If you're the boss and you're imposing your so-called free speech on the employees that creates a hostile environment, that's one thing. If you're an employee on the line that is having a discussion at lunchtime with another employee, I don't know. I mean, it depends on whether there's a hostile environment. It's all fact-driven on that. Let me point out one other thing because I don't want to get this bogged down in a religious discussion. And incidentally, I've got my perfect attendance pin for 4 years in Sunday school, so, you know, I've got it somewhere. I never throw anything away, right, Lynn? So I've got it somewhere. But let me point out that there are a lot of religious people that agree with Holly and me. There are a lot of religious people that see marriage equality and workplace non-discrimination as something to be desired and celebrated. The marriage equality case, the Obergefell case, I think there were, you know, well over 1,000, maybe more, churches and synagogues and faith leaders that joined in briefs arguing in favor of marriage equality because love is love is love, right? And we have religious leaders that are supporting House Bill 160. So it's not a matter of religion doesn't like this. It's like some people who have different beliefs may have a problem with it, but we got a lot of support in the religious community.
And Aaron, and you're right, and there's all sorts of, I mean, there's tons of different religions and then different denominations. Aaron, I want to go to you because I can see you want to say something. But I just want to remind everybody that the volunteers have taken questions, so Aaron will go to you and then we'll move on to questions.
Sounds good. A few things to touch on there. I think it's an important point to give the counterweight here, just like Sandy's saying that there's religious groups, churches, others that support this. There's a lot of businesses that oppose this, but it's really not in their interest to speak out against it often, because you speak out against a law like this and there's consequences to pay. We see what's happened to businesses that say, hey, listen, we serve everyone, like Baer Stutzman, the case that's before the U.S. Supreme Court right now. That's not Baer, that wasn't Baer. That's the Masterpiece Cakes out of Colorado. Baer florist out of Washington. Masterpiece Cakes is Jack Phillips. Jack Phillips' situation where he sold cakes to everybody. He sold cakes to LGBT individuals and anybody who walked into a store. What he didn't want to do was communicate a message that violated his conscience. He didn't make Halloween cakes, and he didn't want to make a cake celebrating a gay marriage. It wasn't about denying service. He served plenty of gay individuals and was willing to do so. So I think this is where, again, this becomes about speech and not about denial of service or those types of things. The other point I want to make here is a much broader point about religious freedom. Which is religious freedom isn't just the freedom to go to church. Religious freedom isn't just the freedom to believe whatever you want. People in dictatorships, all throughout time, were told, yeah, you believe whatever you want. But what makes our nation unique is that we have free exercise of religion. And that means we can live our faith out. That free exercise. Now, for most Christians, that free exercise of religion is experienced in the good they do for our communities. Like I said, fighting the opioid epidemic, fighting human trafficking, fighting against helping orphans, the widow, the stranger, all of these things that we're called to be involved in. For the vast majority of us, me in particular, I'm never going to be asked to make a cake for a gay wedding because I can't make box cake. But at the end of the day, what I experience my religious freedom is my ability to do good, my ability to work at the homeless shelter in Athens County. And so this is where, when we're talking about religious freedom, this is a broader discussion that we need to have to really understand why it is our First Amendment protections are so important.
It seems
could we
like
get back to the point of the discussion here, which is the business case for House Bill 160? Because I think, we in this room and others I know who are gay, lesbian, and transgender, we have a right to live our lives too. We have a right to live authentically too, and that's why House Bill 160 will permit that to happen with the businesses that have our support and have our back.
That's what I was going to say. It seems like a collision course between people who want to live out their faith and live out their lives.
One last comment on the business argument here. I think what's important too is, sometimes you'll see these things being said. They are an economic boom, or they're good for business. Well, if you go look at the list of Forbes' top 10 states for business right now, I believe it's either 7, I think it's 8 right now, out of the top 10 states for business do not have one of these laws. because you really cannot. I'd challenge an economist to be able to show a direct correlation between the impact of these laws on a state, be able to show that they really do create economic development. And the top 10 worst states, according to Forbes, for business, 7 of those states do have one of these laws, because at the end of the day, these laws are regulation. And I think most business groups would typically they're fighting regulation.
But was the study factoring in these laws, or was it just on a general scope?
It was Forbes annual list they put out of the top 50, ranking all 50 states on how friendly of a business environment do you have. And if these laws were really friendly for business, I think you would suspect that the majority of states that were in the top of the list would have these laws, and the states at the bottom would not. But you're not seeing that. Now, I'm not saying that you can't draw a correlation either way, but I think oftentimes supporters of the law will draw a correlation.
Let's ask the chamber about this.
Right, okay. So let's move on to Holly, and then we'll do questions.
One thing that you can point to is states that have passed those religious RFRA bills or the bathroom bills have seen tremendous economic loss. In North Carolina, their estimated economic loss was $3.76 billion, and they couldn't even determine if it was going to be more because it would have such long-lasting effects. In Indiana, the state of Indiana had to hire a PR firm to help remediate their image in the place of economic development. So there's states that have really, and then also one other point that I'll make is that a lot of sentiment is changing, right? Millennials, studies have shown that they are at least 70% agree with this issue. As employers look to fill the incoming void that the baby boomer generation will create, they're looking at how millennials feel about policies like this. And millennials now more than ever before this generation, they care about the policies that employers have in place. They are making decisions as to where they work based on those policies as well.
I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I
understand.
By all means. Go for questions.
It's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Questions today have been submitted and written and selected by volunteer members of the Columbus Metropolitan Club's Program Committee. This will provide balance and cohesiveness, so let's get started with the first question.
Aaron, A.J. Casey has a question for you. You've said that public policy doesn't resolve this particular problem of discrimination. What do you think will resolve them?
Well, I think in a lot of these cases, and we're seeing this right now, especially with the LGBT community, with as a card-carrying millennial, with the millennial generation, it's understanding. It's things like virtue, understanding that people can be different and have different worldviews, different lifestyles, and we should all be able to live together with each other. Not every problem, we don't want to take every problem to the Statehouse, take every problem to legislation, because at the end of the day, you end up creating such a massive state and regulating the lives of individuals in a negative way. Again, we're always wanting to look at what are the negative consequences, that maybe even the unintended consequences with a law like House Bill 160.
Hello, I'm Carol McGuire. I'm a member of the Program Committee. This is a question submitted by Mike Cochran. He says, as a millennial, I see major generational differences in attitudes toward LGBTQ acceptance. Many in my generation who are allies, but not themselves LGBTQ, still place importance on living and working in places that recognize equality. I think this is directed to Holly, but certainly anyone on the panel could answer. Is there a regional competitiveness issue if Ohio is viewed as a less welcoming environment for today or tomorrow's workers? And I know you've addressed this somewhat, but perhaps you could take a little bit deeper dive on this.
Absolutely. I think the example that is probably in the minds of many is Amazon. I can say for a fact that they are interested in House Bill 160. Companies as well, major tech giants like PayPal, they are making decisions on where to set roots in a state based on this policy. A job like Amazon, a project like Amazon, that's going to bring in 50,000 jobs, and they just don't want to set roots in a state that can legally discriminate against their workers, or their workers are unable to obtain the housing or public accommodations that they deserve, frankly.
And if I could piggyback off that question real quick, when Sandy, when you said the story about how you and your wife had to go to Seattle to get married, and then you came back to Ohio, and the state of Ohio did not recognize your marriage. What did that do to you personally? As someone whose marriage was not recognized in a state, does that make you want to move? Did it make you not want to be in Ohio anymore?
Now, Lynn's going to laugh at this because she's always anxious to move from Ohio, and I've got such deep roots in my family that I'm sticking around and working on changing the hearts and minds in Ohio rather than fleeing the scene. But I think it is, as Holly said, this is something that businesses worry about. And we saw testimony before the House on the House Bill 160. We heard testimony from folks that didn't want to come to Ohio, had to be talked into it. And so I think from a competitive standpoint, there is a fear that people will leave and go someplace where they are wanted, where they are not rejected, where they're not in danger of discrimination. So sure, in 2005, when the constitutional amendment passed, the anti-marriage amendment, that was a dark day. And that's what gave birth to Equality Ohio, because that was a wrong decision. And we had to gather together and, frankly, as Harvey Milk said, come out. Because, you know, one of the reasons that the young people today are more accepting and tolerant and understanding and loving of our community is because they know people who are LGBTQ. And so I think as we learn and we get to know each other and we do have this civil discourse and make ourselves authentic and vulnerable, they realize there's nothing to fear and everything to protect. So that's why there's been a change.
Carol?
I'm Carol Looper. I am a program committee member and a board member. This is a question from Jennifer Neimer for Aaron. How do you justify supporting legal protections for religion but not for other minority groups? Couldn't your argument on free exercise also be used to deny services, housing, employment, etc., to religious minorities as well?
So if I want to make sure I'm tracking properly with the question here, and I'll do my best. One, I think you see the reason why we have religion as a protected class is because we have a long history of religious discrimination in our country. I'm of Jewish heritage. We can dive into that and see what that all looks like. We also, I mean, and even to this day, we still see religious discrimination going on, especially when you look at what's going on with the Muslim community. It's vitally important to have those protections. And I think earlier Holly brought up RFRAs, Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, and I think what's really important to recognize when we're talking about Religious Freedom Restoration Act is that we've had that law in the books since, I think, 1991 federally, and I know a plurality of states actually have that law, which kind of shows the backlash that happened in Indiana was really overwrought because these laws are in place and haven't been used. Religious freedom has not been used as especially recently, maybe decades, centuries ago, it was used as a hammer against people, but under Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, you can't use religion as a bat against people you don't like or people you disagree with. And we have those protections in law today to ensure we strike that proper balance between religious freedom and other people's views or the government's views. And that's what RFRAs really are about.
And so we have time for one more question. So try to keep the answer brief for whoever the lucky winner is, wherever the question's directed to.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm owner of Regionomics, and I'm asking this question on behalf of Jaron Terry, PFLAG Columbus. How will passage of House Bill 160 help Ohio's children, including LGBTQ children and teens, live healthier, more full lives?
Sandy?
I'd be happy to field that. The children of today, when they realize that Ohio protects them in housing, lending, employment, school, wherever, when they realize that Ohio will protect them, they will feel safe and secure and welcome.
All right. Carol?
Thank you. And I have enjoyed this conversation. This is what CMC is all about, listening to different sides of an issue. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. You can view and share today's forum on all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates worldwide, through the Ohio channel, and anytime, of course, on our CMC website. Please help me thank our sponsor and the news service. And of course, thank our speakers, Sandra Anderson, Holly Gross, Aaron Baer, and Andy Chow. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday.